Welcome to This Explainer. You know, we usually picture epic conflicts kicking off right on the battlefield with clashing swords and massive armies. But the roots of the legendary Kurukshetra War, the absolute centerpiece of the Mahabharata, were actually planted generations before any of that. It's a story of intense human desires, really incredible sacrifices, and the completely devastating unintended consequences of the choices we make.
So let's just dive right into this captivating question. We're going to see how a seemingly harmless romance sparked this massive, multi-generational butterfly effect that literally brought an entire dynasty to its knees. It all traces back to a single moment of infatuation, sure, but the real driving forces here were the fiercely opposing personalities of the people involved.
Right off the bat, we're looking at the core dichotomy of our whole saga. On one side, we have Queen Satyavati. She's a woman with fierce political ambition who strongly believes the ends justify the means. And on the exact opposite side, we have Prince Bhishma. He's a guy who values absolute honor, rigid duty, and unbreakable vows above, well, absolutely everything else. It's your classic unstoppable force meeting an immovable object, a dynamic that honestly still ruins family empires today. And when these two unyielding forces finally collide, the fallout is spectacular.
Section 1. The Origin, the Fisherman's Scented Daughter.
So, let's start at the beginning. As our sources tell us, legends say Satyavati was actually born from a cursed celestial nymph who'd been turned into a fish in the Yamuna River. She was raised by the fisherman chieftain Dasharaja, making her a commoner. And because she quite literally smelled the fish she helped her father catch and ferry, she was initially given the name Matsyagandha, which translates to she who smells like fish. Yeah, not exactly the ideal trait for catching the eye of royalty, right?
But then, a fateful encounter with the wandering sage Parashara completely changed her destiny. Satyavati was highly assertive and just incredibly clear-headed. When the powerful sage demanded her affection, she didn't just passively submit. Instead, she actively negotiated with him to secure her own future. She ensured they were hidden by a mist. She demanded her fish scent be transformed into this eternal, alluring, musky fragrance. And, this is crucial, she made sure her virginal status remained intact to protect her standing in society. That union produced a secret son named Vyasa. And incredibly, he's the guy who grew up to author the very epic we're discussing today.
Section 2. The Catalyst, the Terrible, Unbreakable Vow.
Okay, so here is the spark that lit the fuse. King Shantanu of Hastinapur was out on a hunting trip when he was absolutely mesmerized by that magical, musky fragrance Parashara had gifted to Satyavati. He fell head over heels at first sight and went straight to her father for her hand in marriage. But Dasharaja, the fisherman, played extreme hardball. He demanded that only Satyavati's future sons could ever inherit the Kuru throne. Shantanu was totally heartbroken and actually rejected the offer because he already had a highly capable crown prince, his beloved eldest son Devavrata. But this loyal son just couldn't bear to see his father suffer in such a deep, paralyzing depression.
So without telling his father, Devavrata went down to the fisherman himself. To secure Satyavati's hand for his dad, Devavrata made this horrifying sacrifice, the Bhishma Pratigya. First, he permanently renounced his claim to the throne. But the fisherman was still worried. He thought, well, what if Devavrata's future kids try to fight Satyavati's kids for power? To solve that, Devavrata took an unbreakable, terrible oath of lifelong celibacy and absolute, unwavering service to the throne itself. This incredibly rigid vow earned him a brand new name, Bhishma, which means the one who took a terrible vow.
Now, the demigods watching from above were so deeply moved by this unimaginable level of generosity and sacrifice that they actually showered him with blessings. They granted him Ichamara, which is the immense divine power to choose the exact time of his own death. Ironically, though, while this made him practically invincible, it also brutally ensured he would live long enough to witness the devastating, heartbreaking consequences of the very vow he just made.
Section 3. A desperate grasp for heirs, the succession crisis.
Here is where we really learn that no amount of calculation can outsmart fate. Despite Satyavati's relentless, calculating ambition to put her own bloodline on the throne, the universe had other plans. King Shantanu passes away. Then Satyavati's first son, Chitrangada, takes the throne, but he's quickly killed in a battle with a celestial musician. So her younger son, Vichitravirya, is crowned, but he tragically dies childless from tuberculosis shortly after. Suddenly, Satyavati is left with a kingdom utterly devoid of an heir. Her grand master plan has completely backfired.
Completely desperate to maintain power and preserve the dying dynasty, she hits the panic button. Satyavati first begs her stepson, the celibate Bhishma, to step up and perform his duty by marrying the widows. But Bhishma rigidly refuses to break his vow of celibacy, even to save the kingdom. He just won't do it. Left with literally no other options, Satyavati pulls out her ultimate backup plan. She calls upon her secret first son, the sage Vyasa, to perform niyoga. This was an ancient practice used to father children on young widows, specifically for the sake of continuing a royal bloodline.
But look at how tragic this actually becomes. Vyasa had explicitly warned his mother that children born from such a desperate, forced situation would not bring joy. And man, he was right. During the encounters, Queen Ambika was so terrified by Vyasa's grim appearance that she squeezed her eyes shut. The result? A blind son, Dhritarashtra. Queen Ambalika turned totally pale with fear, which resulted in a pale, cursed son named Pandu. Now, a maid who actually showed respect was blessed with a perfectly healthy, wise son, Vidura. But because of his lower caste, he could never be king. These deeply flawed heirs set the exact stage for a total dynastic collapse. It's a pretty stark reminder that desperate forced solutions usually just breed the very disasters they're trying to prevent.
Section 4. The Princess Denied. The Collateral Damage.
Now, while all that royal drama is unfolding, we have the tragedy of Princess Amba, who represents the absolute ultimate collateral damage of Bhishma's rigid duty. See, earlier, to find wives for Satyavati's weak son Vichitravirya, Bhishma actually violently abducted Amba and her sisters from their marriage ceremony. The problem? Amba was already in love with a king named Salwa. When Bhishma finally let her go to Salwa, Salwa rejected her out of pure humiliated pride. With literally nowhere else to go, she demanded Bhishma marry her to restore her honor. But Bhishma, hopelessly trapped by his vow of celibacy, flatly refused. Amba's life was utterly destroyed in an instant, and she turned into his sworn eternal enemy.
Amba's rage was so profound that she first sought out Bhishma's own teacher, Parashurama, to fight him. When even that failed, she realized something crucial. She just couldn't defeat the invincible Bhishma in her current life. So she underwent severe, agonizing penance to Lord Shiva to ensure she would be reborn specifically as the warrior destined to orchestrate Bhishma's death. She basically weaponized her very soul for revenge, eventually being reincarnated as Shikhandi.
Section 5. The Tragic, Inevitable End, the Final Reckoning.
Fast forward generations later, and the descendants of those flawed heirs, the Pandavas and the Kauravas, go to total war over the throne. Bhishma, still bound by his absolute vow to serve whoever sits on the Kuru throne, is agonizingly forced to command the Kaurava army. He's literally fighting against the very Pandavas he loves like his own grandchildren. For 10 days, he is this unstoppable force of destruction on the battlefield. But then, the Pandava prince Arjuna brings Shikhandi to the front lines. Because Shikhandi was born a woman, Bhishma's strict code of honor forbids him from raising weapons against him. Using Shikhandi as a human shield, Arjuna pierces Bhishma with countless arrows. Bhishma's rigid vow trapped him, and Amba's reincarnated vengeance finally brought the invincible godfather down.
Historian Dhanalakshmi Iyer hits the nail on the head here, framing this perfectly with a quote from Rudyard Kipling: "The female of the species must be deadlier than the male." Satyavati's blind, relentless ambition for her lineage ironically engineered a generation completely encompassed by greed. She snatched the throne from its rightful heir, pushed boundaries and bent rules left and right. And all of that led directly to the total annihilation of her own family line. When you look back at the Ashers of the Kuru dynasty, it leaves us with a really profound question to ponder. On one hand, you have Satyavati, whose calculating ambition twisted the fate of an entire kingdom. On the other, you have Bhishma, whose inflexible, rigid adherence to a single vow caused immense collateral damage and trapped him into fighting for tyranny. So who is truly at fault for the tragedy of the Mahabharata? Does rigid duty or blind ambition cause more destruction? It's a fascinating moral ambiguity to chew on, and it perfectly highlights why these ancient texts remain so incredibly relevant to our lives today. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the history behind the myths.